Eupraxia is a clinical stage biotechnology company focused on developing locally delivered extended release therapeutics. CEO James Helliwell and CFO Alex Rothwell are reviewing the recently published positive treatment outcomes in patients with EoE after 9 months of receiving EP104GI. I'm Martin Gago with Market Radius Research. This is neither recommendation nor investment advice. We're here to learn about the company. James, Alex, thank you very much for joining us, and congrats on what looks like very solid clinical data. How's it going?
Great. Very well, Martin. Thank you very much for having us. Really appreciate you being here and everybody joining us.
Excellent. Alex, you're relatively new to the team here. Before we get into the presentation as the new CFO, why don't you just give us a little overview on yourself and how you fit in here with Eupraxia?
Okay, thanks, Martin. So while I'm relatively new, having formally rejoined in February, I've been involved with the company for a long time and actually was the CFO for the better part of 4 years from late 2017 until the time of the IPO in March of 2021. My background is in Canadian capital markets, corporate finance, and investment banking. My last gig was running Macquarie's equities business in Canada before I moved out west and connected with Eupraxia a couple of years after that. And I've rejoined the company recently after the CFO, Bruce Cousins, retired. And the timing and the excitement around the story sort of drew me back in, and I'm sort of back with the band, so to speak. So that's my update.
And it's lovely to have Alex back in the band. My other co-founder, Dr. Amanda Malone, who did her PhD in bioengineering, and as you will see, has her fingerprints all over the technology we're going to be talking about today. Alex is sort of our third co-founder, so to speak. So we're thrilled to have him back.
Excellent. All right, James, thank you very much for those introductions. And why don't you take it away and walk us through the presentation here?
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Martin. And so just to set the stage a little bit for today, I'm going to try and make this not too technical. So there may be some slides that look a little bit technical. I'm going to try and just give you an impression of what's really going on and why it matters and what it means for the product, the market, and where we are going. I've had my forward-looking statements slide up there for a while, so that probably is enough. So just to give a little bit of background on myself, so I'm a physician by background. I'm a cardiothoracic anesthesiologist, so that means what I did was work in an operating room every day, and I specialized in heart transplants and artificial hearts. So in that, I had to be very, very precise with the drug that we were delivering. So we'd have multiple drugs targeting multiple different tissues. And so I could put a catheter wherever I wanted to be able to deliver that drug exactly to that tissue at exactly the dose for exactly the duration. Now, that's not how most drugs work. So the purpose of this company was to develop a technology, which we have here in front of you, called the Diffuse Sphere. And essentially what this is like a little micro balloon. It's the size of a grain of sand, and we can place it in any tissue in the body, and it will pump out the drug at a very steady rate into that tissue. So imagine what we are doing is treating tissues that need to be treated, but not flooding all the other tissues in the drug, in the body with that drug. So it's a matter of getting maximum efficacy and minimum side effects combined with long duration. What this looks like in practice is what you see here. Now, our first asset, which we're not really talking about today, is osteoarthritis. So this is for the treatment of people who have joint pain. And what you can see is from a single injection in our very large phase 2b study, that single injection at time 0 delivers this very flat delivery of drug all the way to 6 months, which is matching how long people were getting really good pain relief without side effects. And so that's really, really important. And it was seeing this data that enabled us to be able to look out and say, where else can we use this platform? Now, this disease that I'm about to talk about is a bit of a mouthful. We called it Eosinophilic Esophagitis. Eosinophils look just like that thing that you see in front of you. And it is a what kind of white blood cell that's involved in an inflammatory allergic reaction. We call the disease EoE for short. Very simply, what it is it is like asthma, but in the esophagus. When we think of asthma, what do we think of? We think of people who wheeze, who cough, who when they get an allergic exposure or they get sick, it gets worse. And that's all from inflammation in the airways. Well, this is inflammation in the esophagus, so where you swallow your food. What that means is instead of wheezing, like in asthma, you may find it difficult to swallow, painful to swallow, to the point that some food can actually get stuck. And this is a progressive disease. So over time, it will get more and more inflamed, more and more tight, and more scar tissue. So what we really need to do here is to be able to treat all of the features of this disease. What you'll see in this slide, this is a complex disease. It's also kind of the new disease on the block. So in 2020, there were only 150,000 patients with this disease. So it sat in the orphan category. That, however, has changed dramatically. By 2024, they're saying there are 775,000 patients in the United States. Now, that's actually a backwards-looking number. By the time you get the data, it's already happened. So really, by 26, the estimates are this is going to be north of 1 million patients. What does the journey look like for this patient? So if you happen to get this disease, what does it look like? Well, first, you're having difficulty swallowing. You're having pain on swallowing. You tend to retract from social life. You change the way you eat. You change where you eat. And you can change things even as big as your job and your relationship because of how debilitating this disease is. What does treatment look like? So one of the things you can do is eliminate foods from your diet, because a lot of times this is triggered by various foods. However, that tends to not be successful all that much. And the other thing is it's really difficult. You have to get rid of 6 food groups to really do this. And while you're doing that process, you will get up to 8 endoscopies. So that's when they go with the camera through the mouth, go look at your esophagus, take biopsies and pictures. 8 of those in a year is a lot. So you're basically on a very frequent treadmill. The other thing that you can take are steroids. So here, think of things like Flovent. You may have heard of budesonide. Those are basically inhaled steroids that people swallow instead. You have to do that twice a day. It's very challenging. You can't eat or drink when you want. And in addition to that, if you do all of that, you'll get a fungal infection very often in your mouth. So 60 to 70% of people trying that therapy can't do it. In addition to that, you need follow-on endoscopies 2 to 4 times a year, particularly when you're starting treatment. And then there's Dupixent. Dupixent was the first on-label drug for chronic use in this disease in the United States. It is $100,000 a year. It is a monoclonal antibody that is designed to try and target these eosinophils, so these white blood cells. What their data has demonstrated is that 39% of people achieve clinical remission. And so that clinical remission means on the score that they were using called the SDI, which we'll talk about, only 39% of people met that clinical remission guideline. And so there's a lot of room for people to do better, and they tend to go for endoscopies twice a year. So you're hearing this trend, going for lots of endoscopies. Well, we said, what if we can reduce that number of endoscopies, or at least take advantage of them? So it's more than just biopsies and pictures. You're actually delivering the treatment that way, taking advantage of something you're already going for. Well, our Resolve trial is looking at doing exactly that, testing our diffuse sphere with injection into the esophagus. And don't worry, I know that doesn't sound very nice. You're already there for the endoscopy. And second, you don't actually really have nerve endings in your esophagus for feeling when you're getting an injection. If you think about it, when you eat food, you don't really feel that food going down. You might feel hot or cold, but you don't feel anything scratching or scraping. It's the same way you can't feel the injections. What you can see we're doing in this trial very simply is doing more injections as we go. So each group, as they go, we give more drug. by either increasing the dose that we give per injection or the number of injections, with the goal being to cover as much of the esophagus as possible. We're looking at three things, and all three of these are really important. So if you're going to make a drug, this is what you really have to do. And remember that there have been Dupixent, which we talk about, but there have been other drugs that are out there that have been trying, coming from big pharma, that have pulled out of this disease because they could only really affect one of these three categories. So we want to make patients feel better. That's this SDI score. We want to make sure on biopsy, so an objective score looking through a microscope, that we're actually making the tissues look better and healthier because they are getting better and healthier. That's the EOEHSS. And last is we want to measure the count of these eosinophils. So let's look first at the impact of dose escalation. In other words, as we give more, what happens? So here what we can see, and we haven't even gotten to our top 2 doses yet, that data is going to be coming in September. And so what you can see here is that as we give more drug, we are seeing a better response, and also over time. And so at 12 weeks, so 3 months after, we're getting a very good and solid response. Patients are feeling better. Many of them are in clinical remission. By week 24, 100% of the patients in this trial have achieved clinical remission. This is a very meaningful outcome, especially for patients. This means that they get to live a different life. They get to eat very much where they want, how they want. They get to interact socially. Just think about in your day, how many times food is the basis for which we socialize with our family, with our friends, and with work. And so being able to bring that back with normalcy into your life is really, really important. So this is a critical outcome. Second, what are we doing to the tissues? Well, we're actually making them better over time. So the numbers here aren't particularly important, but if you look at that trend, what's happening is the more drug we're giving, the more exposure that there is, the better patients are feeling. And when you look at that 64 milligram dose, what you're seeing is that is really a best-in-class response. So that is seeing a level of tissue, a tissue modification, which might actually predict that we can actually modify the disease, which means that we're not just making people feel better, we're actually changing the natural course of the disease. And that's what this data suggests may well be possible. So as we continue to read out the data throughout 2025, where we're going to be doing this at least every quarter with the next data readout in September, that we're going to be able to see hopefully this trend continue. In addition to that, the third thing I talked about, this reaction in eosinophils. So you can see we're getting the number of eosinophils, so all these sort of inflammatory white blood cells that are indicative that you have a sensitivity and are part of the reaction that may be causing inflammation. We reduce them very dramatically. Again, as we go up in dose, we get a better response, and we're seeing that fairly consistently. Now, the other piece of data, and this is really very fresh data, as is what I just walked you through, is actually looking at 9 months. So think about in your life, and most of us take a medication of one kind or another. It might be a blood pressure medication. It might be something that you have to take for pain every day. It might be something else. But if you think about it, you are likely taking something either once or twice a day, or you might be taking a once-a-week injection. Imagine if you can take something and for 9 months, you don't need to think about it. You don't need to remember, did you take your medicine? You don't need to do anything. Well, that's what we're hoping this data is showing from the 9-month period of time. So here you're looking at our 5th cohort, these folks who got 4 milligram injections at 12 sites. So this is only about halfway through our dose escalation. What you're looking at here is the drug level itself. So we call that pharmacokinetics. So it is the release of the drug. What you see here is that it is that green line is almost a totally flat line. And it is delivering for a very long period of time, 9 months, from a single set of doses, all given at the same time on day 0. And really importantly, for the millions and millions of people who take Flovent, which is the same drug that we're using, and they take it for asthma, for COPD. That red line is really what they're exposed to on a daily basis. And we are getting exposure levels 10 times less than that. So in other words, really wide safety margins and delivering in a very stable fashion. So what does this mean for how patients are feeling? Well, consistent with that, as you might expect, patients are the same at 9 months as they were at 6. They have not started to go back yet to their baseline. That's really important. Again, imagine if you got an injection and for 9 months, you did not have to think about taking anything or your disease, it was under control and you were feeling good. That is exactly the objective Eupraxia has as a company. And it's exactly what we seem to be achieving so far in eosinophilic esophagitis. In addition to the patient's symptoms, we also are able to see tissue health. And here again, between 3 months and 9 months, you're seeing a general maintenance of control of the disease and control of the tissues. Same thing with the eosinophil count. What you're seeing again is this general maintenance of maintaining the reduction in eosinophil count all the way to 9 months. So this is incredibly important. What this could mean is based on how people are doing at 9 months, it probably means this has the potential to be a once-a-year injection. So you would see your doctor for an endoscopy you already had to go for. They're taking pictures, biopsies, they deliver the injections in just a few minutes. And then all you have to do is just live your life for the remainder of that year. And this data is suggesting that that may well be possible. In addition to that, from a side effect profile, we're seeing 0 patients who are having the normal complication of steroids within the digestive tract, which is oral candidiasis or thrush. Those infections are very difficult for patients, very hard to treat, and a really debilitating side effect. And we have 0 patients having that. We really are not seeing any meaningful drug-related side effects. Our body's normal steroid is normal and at normal levels. We're not seeing any change in blood sugar. So very, very safe. So what does all this mean? How does this translate into what this market looks like? Remember, we talked about 1 million patients. What this data is suggesting is that it may well be that from a single injection, what we are doing is getting the best relief of symptoms that's available, combined with the best tissue relief that may be modifying that disease. That has the potential to be the first-line therapy. And we have heard that from key opinion leaders who have been out looking at our data and speaking about our data. What does first-line therapy mean? It means when you get diagnosed with the disease, that is the drug that doctors choose to use. If you now think Dupixent is charging $100,000 a year for the therapy for EoE, if we were to charge far less than that to make it available for many, many more patients, and again, not speculating on price, but for the sake of being able to look numerically at what this might mean for market size. If one were to charge 1/3 the cost of Dupixent at $30,000, but of those 1 million patients, achieve just 100,000 patients, that's $3 billion a year in sales. And in doing so, you're also transforming the lives of those patients. If you're having that kind of transformational effect, it seems very likely you would be getting much more than 10% of the market, particularly if you're a first-line therapy. What we have next coming is we are going to have data from this dose escalation trial reading throughout the year. And that is going to continue all through the rest of 2025 and the first half of 2026. Also, very importantly, we are going to have a randomized control phase 2b trial, so a very late stage trial starting this summer, where it is randomized 2 patients getting drug to 1 patient who is getting placebo. We will follow them in a blinded fashion until 6 months. At that 6 months point, we will be unblinding them. That will be in the middle of 2026, which is about the same time that we're going to be getting to the end of the data coming off that dose escalation trial. We then intend to take all of that data for an end of phase 2 meeting with the FDA, looking to start a phase 3 trial in order to allow us to then commercially launch the product in the beginning of 2027. And so lots of news coming, lots going on in eosinophilic esophagitis. We also see potential for gastroenterologists to use this in other diseases, in other ways, thereby greatly expanding our ability to help patients and also greatly expanding the commercial market that's available for us. When you think about this, what we've really described to you today is a technology that our biotechnology company has created that is allowing us to treat osteoarthritis directly in the joint for a long period of time with safety, and doing the same for EoE, targeting just the esophagus. When you think about a disease where you really want to be specific in targeting, cancer almost always comes to mind for people. And yes, you're thinking about that exactly the right way. We can take cancer therapies, put them in our packaging to be able to deliver them directly into a tumor, to be able to eat that tumor from the inside without exposing all our healthy cells to high levels of chemotherapeutic agent. That means that we can maximize the efficacy, we believe, minimize the side effects, and make patients' quality of life much better, while also, we hope, having a much better impact on their cancer. Again, there's very specific cancers we would look at, but we view this as something that we can continue to deliver. So for patients, we can continue to advance what we can do, treat more patients with more therapies, and to be able to do so with a rapid development cycle because we're using existing drugs that we know work, we know exist, and we know what their safety profile is with a known platform because we know how our platform works. All of this is really driven by our ability to use the capital that we have to be able to drive these programs forward. And I'm going to stop now and let Alex Rothwell give you a little bit of sort of market data on our cap table, the cash that we have on hand, and then we would really be pleased to take questions. Alex.
Thanks, James. So right at the end of the first quarter, which we just reported, the company exited with $27.5 million on the balance sheet. That, in combination with the exercise of some warrants that are coming due that are deep in the money, will give the company enough cash to run the EoE programs that James described and into the third quarter of next year. So we have almost 5 quarters of cash available to us. The cap table is quite clean. There are 36 million common shares. There's a 9 million share preferred share structure in place that was led by some Brookfield executives. One of those executives has joined the board, which has been incredibly helpful, and he's been a super active and helpful member of the team in connecting us with pools of capital that could help us finance the osteoarthritis asset off balance sheet in a way that we don't have to unnecessarily dilute at the EPRX level. Partnership discussions continue on that asset as well as in EoE, James, which we didn't really get into, but there's a tremendous amount of interest in EoE among European pharma players, and we've got a large number of those parties engaged in discussions with us. And all in all, we have a very tight cap table. As far as research coverage is concerned, right now we have 2 firms out of the US covering us, Raymond James and Craig Hallam. Both have $12 US target prices. And in Canada, we have Andre Udine at Research Capital, who has a $6 US target price, but has not included EoE in his analysis. And I expect you'll see a change in that soon. So company's well capitalized. Management and the board have lots of skin in the game. As shown here on a fully diluted basis, about a quarter of the shares outstanding are held by management and the board. I think if you look at the preferred shares and you sort of broaden the description of insiders and tightly held shares, we're between 60 and 70% of those shares are are held by long-term holders. And we find ourselves, in a good position going forward from a capital and access and balance sheet perspective for the next 5 quarters. And there will be many catalysts and news releases on our data in EOE between now and then.
Great. Alex, thank you so much for that. I do see that there's a few questions in the Q&A, and maybe I'll address those. And I'm going to start with one which actually really bounces off what you were just talking about, Alex, which is the question was, do we think that there are licensing opportunities for non-dilutive funding in this asset and with the Diffuse Sphere technology? And the answer to that is 100% yes. So Alex talked about the very strong interest that we have in our EOE asset, really sort of looking at globally that we intend to maintain the US rights for that. But certainly there are opportunities throughout the globe. And we look at those as things that investors, we can't predict timing on those, but we believe that they will be very meaningful for investors, very meaningful for the company and its balance sheet when we do those. Our osteoarthritis asset, we are also deep in discussions with that asset to be able to partner that throughout the world for another player to take it. And the other part that question really was asking is, what about your technology? And you're absolutely right. We are, and if you think about this, and try and think about the last time you heard about a drug that was taken once and for a year it lasted. You can't think of one because there isn't one. Other than surgical implants, which are very, very different, there aren't drugs that deliver that way. And so we really have this unique ability to be locally targeted into a tissue and deliver for a very long period of time. So we are very open to and are having ongoing discussions with parties who own their own drugs and are having difficulty delivering them. And we are happy to engage in solving that drug problem. However, we aren't a services company. In other words, we're not going to do it in return for an hourly rate. What we're going to do is do that and co-develop that drug and actually have a long-term piece with milestones and royalties of that drug if we're going to engage in doing that with parties. So we see a lot of opportunity there. One of the other questions that came in really stems back to kind of technology related a little bit. How do you actually give this? I talked about an injection into the esophagus. How do we do it? And the answer is that it's actually quite straightforward. When you go for an endoscopy, essentially what it is it's a long tube. And in fact, I'm actually going to go all the way back to the very first slide so you can actually see this. What you'll see the doctor there is holding in her hands, that's an endoscope. You'll see it's got a light at the end and it's flexible. And you can see where her left hand is, that it's got all these sort of buttons and things to push. So that's to move the camera around. You'll also see right at the end where that light is, there's a little side port that comes out there. That is where you put tools down. So those tools are on long catheters. So if they want to do a biopsy, they actually run a cable down the whole way. And at the end, it's got little forceps. And those forceps will actually grab a piece of tissue and pull it off. And then they'll pull it back up and then they'll drop it in and send it off to the lab. For the injection, it's much simpler than even that. The catheter goes down, it's full of our drug. And at the end is a little needle that's hidden. And then when they are pointing the camera at the wall that they want, they simply deploy the needle. It injects 1 cc, 1 mil of drug, and then they get out. And so it's a very rapid process and something that these endoscopists, the gastroenterologists, do on a daily basis. They're used to it. They're paid very well to do it. And so it's very, very straightforward. And really one of the things I think that you're seeing here, and I think that these questions also really ask is, isn't your platform worth a lot? In other words, why is our market cap what it is at about $150 million? The answer is we are not yet getting the full value of either our assets or of the platform. And part of that is when you have a platform, you don't tend to get a lot of value for the platform until you've really demonstrated it very strongly with an asset. I think what you'll find is that over time, as the market becomes aware of what we are doing, both in individual indications and the potential of the platform, that for investors, that's the moment where it will have been very, very good to be able to come in here. So I'll pause there. And there was a fourth question that maybe Alex, more for you to answer, which is, we just released this amazing data. The stock didn't seem to react, and so I'll leave. The question is why? Is that a matter of following, or why did it not?
It's a good question. I mean, anybody who follows small cap stocks knows that we've been in a very challenging market. And, we had some larger than normal volume after the data came out. The stock lifted, and, a lot of stock turned over. And so obviously we ran into some selling. There's no real good explanation for it other than somebody sold, but the flip side is that somebody bought the stock. So, we believe that if we just continue to execute and deliver good data, that over time the value will be recognized. And, I can tell you without sort of divulging too much, the amount of interest that has come from the US since the last two releases of data is really remarkable, both from investors and firms that want to engage us to provide research coverage and financial sponsorship. So we're obviously mindful of maximizing per share value, and our alignment, as I pointed out before, with board and management owning a very significant chunk of the company, is completely with the shareholders. So we have people showing us deals, and we don't have an interest right at this moment, because we want to make sure that the market actually recognizes value before we would take any additional money to advance other programs, and we have sufficient funds at this time. So I don't know if that answers the question, or if you had anything else you wanted to add to that, James.
No, but that was a great answer,
Mark.
Mark.
The other thing I'll add is it's been an extremely challenging market for biotechs in the last year to 2 years, and recently the regulatory uncertainty with all the changes in bodies and leadership at the FDA has added another layer of stress for investors in that area. And it's actually been something that, as we engage investors, we've been able to tell a very good story, that our type of product is not what is of concern to the FDA. I think that if you are a early stage gene therapy or cell therapy or vaccine, there's reason to be concerned that the regulatory path might be more complicated and might be open to changes in philosophy at the FDA. But our active drug agent, fluticasone, is used by more than 20 million people a day in an inhaled form and has been generic for 20 years. So on the risk spectrum of biotech, I think we're seen to be really very much at the low end, because it is understood how this drug behaves and what it does in the body. And as James showed on the chart, our release profile is down at this level, and the level that people have in the inhaled version is almost a 10x in their body of where we are. So, babies get thrown out with the bathwater in markets like this, and we believe that we're one of those, and we think that there's a fantastic opportunity to become a shareholder at this moment.
Just with your the diffuse sphere and the filling therein, it sort of maybe a bad analogy, but yours is essentially a bullet where you're targeting exactly what it is. You don't need, it can be pretty small as opposed to an inhaler where you're dropping a bomb to kind of get everything, and good things get hit with the bomb as well. While with a bullet, you can get very targeted.
You're absolutely right, Martin. I mean, these are real sniper shots.
Yeah.
They're going exactly where we want them and staying where we put them.
All right.
Well, there's a really good explanation about why the market is starting to get very interested in EOE in that way, because the approved therapy that James referred to is Dupixent, and it is an injection that you give yourself once a week in the leg to treat the esophagus. So you are, this monoclonal antibody, you're treating yourself with something that affects your entire body just to focus on an issue in the esophagus. What we're saying is we are going to treat that tissue only. And the monoclonal antibodies, there have been a number that have tried to follow Dupixent, which has been marginally effective, that have failed. And so the market is starting to say, hey, maybe steroids, which we know work in this condition, but have all kinds of side effects, are the answer. And they just need to be delivered in a way that's very targeted. And it appears from our data that we are doing that.
I'm curious, and this folds in with a question from the audience as well. With your phase 2 trial that you'll be starting later in the year, how it's different in the sense that there'll be a placebo in it, and right now you're testing the dosing in that. Will it be whatever that dose is, a single dose, where sort of a specific dose, or will there be sort of different doses that'll be tested in the control group as well?
Yeah, so it's a really great question. So the phase 2b randomized trial, you're absolutely right, has a placebo. So there'll be 2 patients getting drug for every 1 getting placebo. And so how do we pick the dose? Well, we've been doing this dose escalation and we're seeing this data. And what we're learning there is about efficacy. We're learning about safety, and we're learning about durability, how long it's lasting. So what we're going to do is pick first a dose that we think is the best combination of all of those things. We're going to recruit that dose relative to placebo and be doing that. Now, we have the option from the regulators of continuing with just 1 dose, or if as we're recruiting and more data is coming, because we got so much data to bring to market, as that data is coming, if we say, this other dose also deserves a chance, we then have the ability to add sort of a dose B. So a dose A and a dose B, or just have a single dose if the data is clear, this is the one we want to go for. So lots of flexibility for us there in order to be able to set us up for having the absolute best and fastest phase 3 and path to market.
Picking a dose, I would think there are a lot of trade-offs that you have to look at. And I would think in a practical clinical sense, having a dose that would last a full year, even if it's maybe higher than, let's say, ideally suited, but if that can coincide with the annual checkup, that would have a lot of economic and practical benefit, although maybe not the ideal timing of the dosing, let's say. Would the FDA take those types of considerations into account when deciding on what the ideal dose would be?
Yeah, so I mean, the FDA is primarily motivated by a combination of safety and efficacy. And so provided that the dose we pick gets this right balance of safety and efficacy, which given both that we are seeing in this trial, we think is not going to be an issue from the regulatory perspective. Obviously, that's what this next trial is partly there to help solve for us. But you're absolutely right. We're looking for that probably once a year dose. So it aligns, which means we don't really want a 9-month dose, although it would be perfectly acceptable and better than anything else. We also don't really want an 18-month dose, because the doctors then are going to bring you in for your annual, and then they bring you again at 18 months, and then they bring you in again for another annual. And so what we really want to do is, for the benefit of the patient, the benefit of the system and the doctors and the payers, is to really align to that 1 year. So we're going to be balancing all of those factors that, you're right, are all kind of in competition a little bit with one another to get to that optimal dose.
All right. And I'm curious, with the data you've had so far, everyone has responded appropriately have responded? There have been no responders as well. Have there been any super responders where they've gotten a little bit of a dose and it's gotten them like over the goal line, so to speak, or is everyone sort of responding pretty consistently?
Yeah, so I mean, it is in general for a small number study, it is remarkably consistent. So our early cohorts 1, 2, and 3 responded, but not as deeply as our later ones. So we're seeing this general sort of the more you give, the more response there is. Now, that biology and people being what they are, that's never going to occur entirely consistently. So in other words, we had, 1 or 2 patients in the early doses that did much better than we thought. We haven't seen them yet, but we are likely in our later cohorts to have some patients who simply don't do as well as one might expect. All of that, when we get to the phase 2b, gets kind of lost in the numbers. And that's really common in trials. You'll have people who are super responders, as you point out, and some who are non-responders. We haven't seen any non-responders yet in our higher doses. But it would be normal to expect 1 or 2 to pop up through the course of this trial. But overall, the response we're seeing is superior to other therapies that are available, both in efficacy, in tissue response, in duration, and in safety. So we believe that combination really does create a shift in what's available for patients, we hope.
Yeah, and Martin, I would add, I don't think any of this is surprising. Steroids have been known to work in this condition for a long time. They have been dosed off-label for a long period of time. Flovent has been sprayed and swallowed. So the same drug agent, fluticasone that we use, but the problem has always been side effects and proper absorption. You need to take so much, and when you just swallow it, it just coats the inside of the esophagus. We're actually getting into the layer of the tissue where the disease lives, putting the same drug that actually works a bit when you swallow it. We're just putting it right in there and keeping it there for a long time. So it's not surprising that this is working. But to James's point, we're going to have variability in there. Each cohort is 3 patients, but so far, it's pretty clear that there's good activity and that the drug is working as it's been seen off-label, but even more so.
Do we have any idea what causes EOE?
Yeah, so it's pretty complicated. It's a little bit of sort of the what causes asthma. So
Okay.
There are clearly genetic predispositions towards being what we call atopic. And you may have heard the term atopic dermatitis, or what we call eczema. And what that atopic really means, I'm a little bit sensitive and allergic. And so it means you have this biological substrate that says, I will respond to allergens more than someone else might. That tissue might be in the lungs, it might be the skin, or it might be the esophagus. And so we know that genetic subtype has a higher predisposition. And then it's, okay, what's the allergen? Well, sometimes maybe it's food, but it's very difficult to figure out. Sometimes it may be environmental allergens. So you may be breathing things in and it happens you swallow some ragweed pollen or something like that, and that can make it worse. We've heard things from some physicians who say it's things like Tide Pods, those little pod things that you put in your dishwasher or your laundry, and things like that may be there. The answer is we don't know. What we do know is that we're diagnosing this much more because we're looking for it. But in addition to that, it's also growing very rapidly. So this is more than just diagnosis. This is also the incidence of the disease is actually rising fairly significantly.
Can you review what sorts of milestones and just the timing of how the phase 2A and then what the timeline is for that and when the 2B would start up?
Yeah, so I'll start with the 2A. So our next, so we just released this data on the 5th of May. The next data release would be, we expect, in fairly early September. And that'll be a really comprehensive data release, just with the way all the timing comes together with these cohorts. So we anticipate that'll be 1 year of follow-up from cohort 5, who we just showed you the 9-month data. That's going to be 9-month data from Cohort 6 and the first 3-month data from Cohort 7 and Cohort 8, who are pretty much on top of each other in terms of timing. And so that's a really important data release. And then you're going to see in Q4, towards the end of the year, another data release. So it's going to be Cohort 6 getting to 1 year, Cohort 7 and 8 getting to 6 months. And that will then continue through Q1 and Q2 of 2026 to finish off that trial in terms of data releases. The phase 2b, we expect to be responsive to the data that we're getting. And so really we expect that to begin, again, kind of late summer, early fall, about the time that we're having that data release for September.
Okay, so you'd get the full year data before you would start the phase 2b at that point.
That's probably where that timing is going to land. If there's clear indicators that we think we've got a dose before that, then we will certainly announce why we've made the choice we've made for the dose we've got.
And you have to run those choices by the FDA and say, hey, this is how we want to structure and run the trial with these doses, and they give it a thumbs up, or is that your decision?
No, so it's our decision within a set of parameters. So in other words, we've been and said, this is what we're thinking, and this is where we are to the regulatory agencies, and they have given us broad permission because of our safety that we have broad windows in which we can then make a choice to balance out that efficacy, durability, and safety. But we're at 120 milligrams. We have regulatory permission to go much higher than that because of the safety that we've demonstrated. We don't think for the safety, the durability, and the efficacy, particularly the efficacy and the durability, we need to go beyond 120. But that'll be driven by data.
And the higher number or the later starting cohorts, those have are just more points, more injection points covering more of the esophagus. That's the essential difference.
So a bit of both. So Cohort 7 and 8 are the first time we've given 20 injections. That sounds like a lot. It's actually very quick to do. And that's full coverage of the esophagus. So Cohort 6 is 16 injections. So it's 75% coverage. So Cohort 7 and 8, the first time we've had 100% coverage. Cohort 7 is giving the same dose per injection site as Cohort 6, so 4 milligrams. But in Cohort 8, we're giving 6 milligrams per injection site for a total of 120.
Okay, so the same 20 points, but with a higher dosage.
You got it.
Okay. All right. And on this, we're obviously focused on the EOE here, but it has been brought up on the OA that you are looking to partner with that. Is there any other sort of clinical or medical scientific data expected out of that, or is it waiting for sort of economic partnership data that we're looking for? And you can never obviously put a time frame on when that falls into place.
Yeah, so we're really looking for a partnership, and really that's about a commercial partnership. We're not going to lean into the commercial lift of building a 200-person sales force to tackle the US and pricing, market access, and reimbursement required for that asset. So we're looking for that appropriate commercial partner there. And in the meantime, we have no new scientific data that's going to be coming.
All right. And with your platform technology, the Diffuse Sphere, and your other indications that you put there, could there potentially be some news coming out of the rest of the portfolio, or is just you've got a lot here going with the EOE and the OA, and that's just on the back burner for now?
Yeah, so it's not on the back burner. As to when we'll be talking about that, whether it's late 25 or early 26 is difficult to predict. I'm going to lean towards early 26. But we absolutely will have some things to say about what we believe we can do beyond EOE and beyond OA to make use of the platform in a variety of different dimensions.
Right. I will add, James. I mean, we're working with GIs, obviously in EOE, and we've been approached by a few of our sites to say, this is working so well, it seems, in the esophagus. I have a very large number of patients who have strictures from Crohn's disease. And, we've been approached to run trials on Crohn's treatment rather than sort of patients having to have bowel resections. So we think that there are associated low-hanging fruit indications in GI that, I wouldn't be surprised if you saw some programs starting in the coming quarters because it's very, very logical. They're using steroids already to treat these conditions. And the fact that they're seeing a localized, and long-lasting treatment effective in the esophagus, the thinking is, well, why don't I just take Eupraxia's microspheres, put them in the Crohn's stricture right in the bowel, same way the injection, except it's from the other side. And it's perfectly logical. And the GIs are asking us, please, will you run these trials? So there's other stuff that we can do in GI that we think is hugely value driving as well.
And this wouldn't be a new formulation. This would be the EP104 GI, but just applied in a different part of the body.
Correct.
Okay.
Which from a commercial perspective is also really interesting because what you're doing is you're adding a whole new segment population, but it's the same doctors, it's the same drug delivered exactly the same way. And so, but you can double the size of the market opportunity. And obviously that means double the number of patients that we get to help.
Okay, it sounds like it's in I don't know, early stage, but it's progressing. Would that be something you could possibly do on your own, or would that be maybe a partnership type program to develop?
We would do that on our own.
That's just a money thing, Martin. If we can shuffle our budget around and it's not that expensive. Anyway, we're having discussions as a firm about how to manage that. But if all of a sudden we start a Crohn's trial in the third quarter of next year, that's a pretty meaningful indication to pursue.
Yeah. Okay. And obviously, if you're going to start a Crohn's trial in next year, you'd announce that earlier to sort of submit it to the FDA and go through all those steps to get it properly strucred. And that, and we'd learn about it sooner than that.
Yeah, you would. Yeah, I think you would learn about it when we knew we were doing it.
Yeah.
So once we had the trial and the permission to do that trial, we would certainly make that announcement.
Yeah, and I want to be clear. It's Crohn's strictures. James, you may just want to, just so people don't think that we're looking to treat primary Crohn's.
Yeah, so I mean, the way to think about this is that there's a lot of patients with exacerbations from Crohn's that are localized. So people tend to take, for example, Humira or Remicade, so systemic drugs that work to dampen the immune system in Crohn's. Despite that, a lot of patients actually end up with flares. Those flares can be very debilitating. Many of them are associated with strictures. So strictures are a real tightening, and that can lead to a bowel obstruction, which means you're going to have to get a resection. So you're going to have to actually go for another abdominal surgery. The problem is each time you go for surgery, it gets harder and harder for the subsequent surgeries. And so the goal is to try and, for the patient's benefit in both the near term and the long term, is to avoid those surgeries. So if you have the ability to treat those inflammatory exacerbations and their attendant strictures or narrowings, then you can have a massive positive impact on patients. And those tend to move around. So in other words, you may treat one here, but a year later, another one's going to pop up in another place. So it becomes this ability for gastroenterologists to be able to really help patients with Crohn's and ulcerative colitis.
All right. We have to wrap things up here shortly. Any final comments or thoughts to leave investors with at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think first I want to thank everybody for taking the time and showing the interest. We believe with where we are in the data right now, this is a very, very compelling place. And we think it represents, as far as biotechnology goes, an incredibly low risk opportunity. We're using a drug we know works in this disease, we know is safe, we know that we're delivering it at levels that are lower than are traditionally seen. We're seeing very positive and convincing results. And we are hearing that from the physicians, both the key opinion leaders as well as those who are sort of daily treating these patients and involved in our study. We believe it represents a really compelling opportunity for investors. And we're really inspired by what we're doing for patients. The company whose name is Eupraxia was the Greek goddess of well-being. And it remains our primary goal to bring well-being to patients. And we think we're doing that. We think we have a lot of opportunity to continue to do that. And in the process, deliver great rewards to shareholders. So, Alex, I'll hand to you for closing.
Nope, I'm good. I've said what I need to say. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. That was excellent. We covered a lot of territory, very informative and very informational. Thank you. Great talking to you, and I'm looking forward to our next update. Have a great day. Cheers.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Martin.
Thank you, Martin.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.